My father's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "This is my daughter, the one who never took care of herself." The room erupted in polite chuckles, but every laugh felt like a nail driven into me. My name is Leonie Prescott, and in that moment, surrounded by 200 wedding guests, I was no longer a woman with a life of my own. I was just the punchline of his favorite joke. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, their golden light spilling across white tablecloths and polished crystal. Around me, conversations hummed with the practiced ease of people who knew they belonged in rooms like this. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, a navy dress smoothing over my knees, the single strand of pearls at my throat resting with the weight of memory. My mother's voice lingered in them, her reminder that worth didn't need to glitter to be real. But under the scrutiny of so many eyes, even that comfort felt fragile. Victor Prescott knew how to seize a crowd. My father had always thrived on moments when he could draw laughter at someone else's expense. That night, with 200 guests gathered, he tapped a glass and claimed the microphone as if the spotlight had been waiting for him all along. His jokes came easily, warming the room with polite chuckles, the kind that bind strangers together quickly. And then his hand swept toward me. The words landed like a slap I'd spent a lifetime bracing for. A ripple of laughter spread, restrained at first, then looser, easier. I saw a man stifle a grin behind his wine glass. A woman's shoulders shook as she pressed fingers against her lips, her jewelry trembling with the movement. Even a few of the Hastings relatives, our new in-laws, allowed themselves small, complicit smiles. In that instant, the glittering hall blurred into something far more familiar. An old parking lot under the weight of Sunday heat. The sting of my father's hand tightening around my arm as he tested the flesh like produce at a market, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Feels heavier than the good book itself." Men laughed, women looked away, and I had stood frozen, learning how humiliation travels best in public air. Now, decades later, the same lesson echoed. Only this time, it wasn't a handful of neighbors. It was an entire ballroom, and I sat in the middle of it, steady on the outside, while the wound that had shaped my life split open again under the applause of laughter. The laughter in that ballroom cracked something open, and memory poured in before I could stop it. I was back in the dusty streets of a Texas town, where my father carried himself like a man who owned more than just a plumbing business. To neighbors, he was respected, even admired. To me, he was relentless. My brother, tall and disciplined, was paraded as the example. I was the counterpoint, the one he used as a punchline. I can still see the polished pews of Sunday service, the way he shook the minister's hand with the charm of a man who knew his audience. But the moment we stepped outside, his hand would grip my arm, fingers pressing hard. His words pitched loud enough for the parking lot to hear. The men laughed. The women looked away, and I shrank smaller each time, trying to fold myself into invisibility. They called it humor. I knew it for what it was, shame delivered in public doses, strong enough to linger for decades. At home, my mother tried to patch the wound with silence and kindness, slipping an extra piece of chicken onto my plate and murmuring, "Eat, sweetheart, you'll be fine." But she never once challenged him, never once broke the current of humiliation that coursed through our household. From her, I learned that quiet could feel like safety, even when it was a prison. It was in those moments that I made an unspoken vow. If my father fed himself on my humiliation, then I would starve him of the opportunity. I would keep my triumphs hidden, my achievements unspoken, leaving him with nothing to twist into ridicule. Invisibility became my armor, forged in the fire of his laughter. The truth was far from the story my family told about me. My work had carried me into rooms where decisions altered the course of nations, where a misplaced word could unravel alliances. I had sat across from generals, sifted through intelligence that weighed more than gold, and shouldered responsibilities few could fathom. Yet at home, I let that truth gather dust, tucked away like medals in a drawer no one opened. To my father, I was nothing more than the daughter who never lived up to his favored son, the woman without a husband, without status, someone he could measure against and find lacking. He never asked what I did, and I never offered it. Let him believe what he wanted. His disappointment was a script he had rehearsed for years. That night at the wedding, his narrative had fertile ground. The Hastings family, polished and wealthy, filled the room with the quiet superiority of people accustomed to measuring worth in pedigree and presentation. Their daughters in designer gowns glided through the crowd. Their fathers spoke in practiced tones about law firms and investment portfolios. I felt their eyes on me, cataloging details, my accent softened by years away, but still Southern. The navy dress that was neat but unremarkable. The pearls too modest for a night like this. I caught a woman lean to her companion and whisper, "That's the Prescott aunt? She looks ordinary." I steadied my breath, reminding myself not to flinch. Across the room, I saw my father at the head table, his shoulders squared, his expression smug. He was at ease here, drunk on the approval of strangers. And then I understood. This wasn't a careless slip of the tongue, some impulsive remark gone too far. He had waited for this moment, waited for an audience of wealth and status to cement the story he'd told about me my entire life. For him, this wasn't a joke. It was a performance, and I was once again his stage. The band had just shifted into a softer melody when my father's voice cut across the room again. He clung to the microphone as if it belonged to him, his grin wide, his posture puffed with pride. He launched into a funny memory about me at 12. A town fair, and 3 hot dogs supposedly gone missing down my throat. Laughter rolled through the room, spilling from table to table, people elbowing each other, some slapping the table as if the tale were worth an encore. I sat still, the stem of my glass trapped between my fingers. Those hands had once signed orders that shaped missions, hands that steadied soldiers in chaos. Yet here, in front of chandeliers and white linens, they trembled around a glass of water as I was turned into a caricature. I opened my mouth, words pressing hard against my ribs, ready to burst free. For a split second, I saw myself rising, voice clear, ending it all. Then my father's eyes caught mine, daring me to speak. The look was one I knew too well. He had worn it in church parking lots decades ago, daring me to fight back while men around us laughed. My body remembered before my mind did, and I lowered myself back into my chair. His voice grew louder, his hands animated, weaving another joke about my school days, reshaping me into a lazy figure for the Hastings family to chuckle at. I glanced around the room, my son's gaze fixed hard on his glass, avoiding me. The in-laws with polite smirks stretched across their faces, and my father riding the wave of his own performance. For a moment, I felt utterly alone. Then came a sound so small, it almost went unnoticed, the synchronized clink of crystal set down against linen. I turned. 4 groomsmen had risen together, shoulders squared, their faces steady. Recognition jolted through me. I had seen those faces in desert dust, under the red glow of convoy lights. Men who had once followed my lead when the night stretched too long and too dangerous. I hadn't known they'd be here, hadn't realized my nephew's friends were the same soldiers I had carried through fire. The tallest among them, voice firm and unshaking, cut through the silence my father had filled. "Sir, ma'am is our commanding officer." The ballroom froze. Laughter died mid-breath. A woman at the front gasped too sharply, choking on air. My father's hand trembled as he lifted his glass, trying to mask the sudden pallor in his face. He swallowed too quickly, and dark Bordeaux sprayed across the spotless tablecloth, blooming like a wound. The second groomsman, younger, voice tinged with emotion, added, "If not for her, some of us wouldn't be standing here tonight." Eyes shifted from them to me. The very room that had just conspired in my humiliation was now trapped in stunned silence. I had no need to rise, no need to explain or correct. The truth had already taken form, not from my lips, but from those who owed me their lives. And for the first time, It wasn't me stripped bare under the light. It was him, my father, exposed in front of everyone, with nothing left to shield him but the napkin shaking in his hand. The laughter collapsed into silence so sharp it rang louder than any joke. Chandeliers glittered above us, their light suddenly harsh, throwing long shadows across faces turned in unison toward the groomsman. One of them, a scar tracing faintly along his temple, spoke with a calm that cut deeper than anger. "Ma'am isn't just an officer. She saved our convoy in Helmand. If it hadn't been for her, some of us wouldn't be standing here." The words dropped heavy, and the room froze. Even the clatter of a spoon falling onto porcelain sounded like a gunshot. A woman near the head table whispered, almost reverent, "Colonel Prescott?" The name caught fire, leaping from table to table, until murmurs filled the air like dry grass catching flame. I watched as the Hastings family shifted in their seats. The matriarch, who had measured me earlier with polite disdain, lifted a trembling hand to her pearls, as if those stones might anchor her in this new reality. Across the room, Jennifer's gaze locked with mine. There was no superiority left in her eyes, only shock, calculation, and something close to respect. She had realized what the rest of the room was only beginning to grasp. The story had shifted, and it was no longer my father's to tell. Victor's face flushed crimson, his smile cracking under the weight of silence. He forced a laugh that wavered in the air, brittle and desperate. "These young men are exaggerating. Come on, folks. It was just a joke. Surely no one here is taking this seriously?" No one laughed. Not a single chuckle rose to save him. A tall groomsman, once a staff sergeant, stepped forward half a pace. His voice carried steady and sure across the ballroom. "Sir, you don't have to like us, but you will respect her." The statement landed like a verdict. No bravado, no raised volume, just truth made heavy by memory. Victor faltered. His mouth opened, searching for another quip, another story, some recycled line to summon laughter back to his side. For the first time in his life, he found nothing. His hands fumbled for his napkin, dabbing at the spreading stain of Bordeaux on the linen as though the real problem lay in the wine and not in his words. The silence pressed harder, thicker, until the absence of laughter became its own punishment. The same crowd that once fueled his performance now turned into an audience of jurors. He had always thrived in the spotlight. Now the same light revealed him bare, stripped of power. I sat motionless, my pulse racing, but I didn't need to speak. For once, I wasn't the one exposed beneath that glittering chandelier. It was him, my father, finally laid bare under the brilliance he had always believed belonged to him. The event coordinator hesitated with the microphone in hand, then extended it toward me. The entire ballroom held its breath, the silence heavier than the crystal chandeliers above, every eye fixed on me, waiting. Would I strike back and finish my father here, or choose another path? I rose slowly, the scrape of my chair loud in the hush. Each step toward the podium felt weighted with years of swallowed words. Memories surged, nights when his mockery made the dinner table colder than winter, moments when I tucked medals deep in drawers so he could never twist them into ridicule. All of it pressed against my ribs, urging release, and yet I steadied myself, fingers tightening around the microphone. I drew in a deep breath. My voice, when it came, was calm but carried through the hall. In my work, we call it quiet professionalism. You do the hard things. You tell the truth when it's hardest, and you bring your people home. Tonight, we're here to celebrate two people who chose each other. I lifted my glass, the stem cool against my hand. So let's raise a toast to Mark and Jennifer, to respect, especially when it demands the most from us. For a heartbeat, the silence held. Then the sound erupted. Not laughter this time, but applause, rising like a wave and breaking over me with a force that nearly stole my breath. Chairs scraped back as people stood, one by one, until the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Everyone, except Victor. He sat rigid, unmoving, his face pale beneath the golden light. The chandeliers shone on him too, but for the first time in his life, he was no longer the center of that light. It had shifted, irrevocably, to me. A few days passed before I made the drive back to the shop that had been my father's world for most of his life. There were no chandeliers here, no polished crystal, only the familiar grit of oil and metal, the faint hum of a country song whispering from a radio tucked behind a cluttered shelf. The roll-up door groaned half open, and the smell of grease and old cardboard wrapped around me as I stepped inside. He sat hunched at the workbench, a ledger spread open, a pencil clutched as if the numbers might obey through sheer force. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't greet me. I placed the socket wrench set on the bench between us, the steel clinking softly against the wood. "I'm bringing these back," I said evenly. "And I'm returning something else too. The names you gave me in parking lots, at dinner tables, at that wedding. I'm not carrying them anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the whir of the box fan rattling in the corner every few rotations. My father set the pencil down with exaggerated care, his hand pausing as though the weight of it had grown unbearable. His eyes fixed on the ledger, but his voice came low, roughened by something I hadn't heard in him before. "I've been mean my whole life," he muttered, "because I was afraid. Afraid you'd outgrow me. Afraid you'd leave me behind." The words hung heavy between us. I studied the man who had ruled my childhood with barbed jokes, realizing in that instant he wasn't a giant at all, only a frightened man who had built armor out of cruelty. The invincible figure I once cowered from revealed himself as fragile, afraid of being forgotten. I held his gaze, steady, refusing to let the silence soften the truth. "Jokes are supposed to be funny for the one hearing them," I told him. "Not just the one telling them. If you can't stop, then I won't bring myself or my son near you again." His jaw twitched, but he didn't argue. He didn't deflect with another quip or scramble for laughter to shield himself. He simply sat there, eyes clouded, lips pressed tight, while the radio carried on softly with a song about loss and roads gone wrong. There were no guests here to applaud, no crowd to bear witness, just us. Just the echo of a lifetime's worth of words finally returned to their source. And for the first time, the line I had drawn was clear, unmistakable, unyielding. This was not a performance. It was the reckoning he and I had both postponed for too many years. The workshop smelled of gasoline and dust, but for me, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I turned toward the open door, light spilling in across the concrete floor. Behind me, he sat very still, a man stripped of the only script he had ever known. And in that silence, I walked out carrying nothing that wasn't mine. Weeks later, I stood among a small crowd at the Veterans Memorial, the air crisp, the flag above us catching in the autumn wind. I wore my dress uniform, medals lined neatly against the fabric, their weight familiar yet quieter than before. My father stood beside me, his posture straighter than I'd seen in years, his mouth closed. For once, he didn't fill the silence with a jab. A man stepped forward, his hand rough from work, his eyes kind. He clasped my hand firmly and said, "Thank you for your service." My father didn't interrupt, didn't diminish, didn't try to redefine me with a laugh. He simply stood there, letting the words land and remain untouched. It was a silence I had never thought possible. The following day, at a family barbecue, smoke curled from the grill while children shrieked through the yard. My father balanced a plate of roast chicken, his tie loosened, his face softened by the glow of firelight. He turned toward a circle of cousins and uncles, clearing his throat. "This is my daughter," he said, his voice level. "She runs things bigger than this grill, and she takes care of people. That's all I'll say." No laughter followed, no smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. The words stood on their own, plain and unpolished, yet heavy with something I had never been offered before: respect. I smiled faintly, not because I needed the recognition, but because it meant the climate had shifted. No more jokes, no more careless cuts. I had learned long ago that my worth was mine alone to define. But now, at last, the air between us carried something different. Belated, fragile, but real. And that was victory enough.